Hello Light Keepers and Graveyard Creepers. Flins is the new best main DPS for electro-charged teams thanks to his ability to alter the reactions mechanic while also using this mechanic to deal significant damage. For builds, go with the new Night of the Skies Unveiling set or max damage, but you can use Gilded Dreams for now until you can obtain a full functioning version of that set. Use attack percent, crit main stats, and prioritize crit and energy recharge with some attack for substats. His best weapon option is his signature polearm, and decent substitutes to use are Staff of Scarlet Sands and Fractured Halo. Good free-to-play options would be the new Prospector's Shuffle, Deathmatch, Battle of the Fjords, and the Inazuman event polearm. Hi, I'm Aaron, and this is your Too Long Didn't Watch. If this is all the information you wanted, then I want to thank you for stopping by. But if you would like to support me, then you can take a bite out of that up against Macam flavored subscribe button down below, and or keep the video playing. That is up to you. For everyone still here, before we go into his kit overview, it's important to first mention the two new Nod Krai mechanics being brought in with this 6.0 patch. First are the Gleam mechanics. When there is one Nod Krai character in the party, Nascent Gleam will be active, but if there are two or more Nod Krai characters in the party, Ascendant Gleam will be active. This is important for triggering certain buffs for Nod Krai characters. The other mechanic is related to how non-Nod Krai characters interact with Nod Krai ones. When non-Nod Krai characters cast their skill or burst, it will grant buff to all party members and will increase the lunar reaction damage dealt by party members based on a specific stat corresponding to the character's element. The conversions are on screen now, and the cap for the total amount of lunar damage bonus granted at any one time is 48%. These two mechanics are present to incentivize the use of two Nod Krai to non-Nod Krai team comps. Great, now with that summary over and done with, let's move on to Flins' overview. Flins is the taser DPS who performs best when using the reaction to amplify his own damage. Flins' skill is pretty complex. On the initial cast, Flins will enter his main DPS state. In this state, Flins' normal and charge attacks are infused with Electro, they cannot be overridden with other elements, and they gain increased scaling based on his skill's talent level. His interruption resistance is also increased by 50%, and his elemental skill is replaced with a new elemental skill. This new skill will deal damage and cause his next elemental burst to change to a mini version of itself for the next 6 seconds. Additionally, this new elemental skill's cooldown will always be 6 seconds and cannot be reduced in any way. Lame! Flins has two different elemental bursts, like mentioned before. His primary one has one of the coolest burst animations in the entire game. After using it, he will deal an initial burst of electro damage, then deal 3 instances of lunar charged damage. After that, if Ascendant Gleam is active, and if there are lunar charged thunder clouds nearby, he will deal 2 additional instances of lunar charged damage. This burst has a cost of 80 and a 20-second cooldown. Unfortunately, this burst should very rarely be used. Instead, his mini burst is much better. The new mini burst will become active for 6 seconds after using his secondary elemental skill like mentioned before. Upon use, his burst will deal an instance of lunar charged damage, and then if Ascendant Gleam and thunderclouds created by lunar charged are active, it will deal 2 additional instances of lunar charged damage. This burst has a cost of 30 with no cooldown. As a Nod Krai character, Flins comes with a unique reaction, Lunar Charged. Flins will also increase the base damage of this reaction by 0.7% for every 100 attack he has, up to a max of 14% at 2000 attack, just like a Nefa. Flins' first Ascension passive will increase his Lunar Charge reaction damage by an additional 20% when Ascendant Gleam is active. And for his A4 passive, Flins will gain increased Elemental Mastery based on 8% of his attack. This buff will cap at 160 extra Elemental Mastery, which is at 2000 attack. Flins' talent priority is straightforward. His burst should be prioritized first, as it will contribute to about 85% of his total damage output due to it being considered lunar charge damage. After that, you could level up his elemental skill if you would like to, but this is optional since his skill deals little damage. His normal attack though, forget about him. Flins almost never utilizes the scaling that this normal attack talent level provides, as he instead uses the normal attack skillings provided by his skill, so you can completely ignore them. It might seem confusing at first, but his combos are also very simple, at least when you understand them. Use his skill, normal attack for the energy particle, use his skill and burst for the damage, and start normal attacking. Continue normal attacking to generate energy until his skill is back off cooldown. Then use his skill, burst, normal attack for the particle, and swap off. Now that we've gone through his base kit, let's go through his constellations and see what they bring to the table. Flins' first constellation will reduce the cooldown of his secondary elemental skill from 6 seconds to 4 seconds. Additionally, when party members trigger lunar charge reactions, Flins will recover 7 elemental energy. This effect can occur once every 5.5 seconds. The extra energy generation is very beneficial. The part that makes his constellation disgusting disgusting is the initial effect. This cooldown reduction to 4 seconds doesn't seem like much at first, but allows him to perform another cast of his mini burst. This increases his total damage dealt by his burst by 50%, and since this is where nearly all of his damage lies, it ends up being such a disgustingly overpowered damage boost, and it nets him the second most damage increase of all of his vertical investment options, only surpassed by his final Constellation. Flins A2 will cause the next normal attack he deals after using his secondary elemental skill to deal an additional instance of lunar charge damage equal to 50% of Flins' attack. Additionally, an Ascendant Gleam is active, and while Flins is on the field, when his electro attacks hit an opponent, that opponent's electro res will be decreased by 25% for 7 seconds. This Constellation is also beyond phenomenal, as not only will it make Flins' normal attacks useful for something other than generating energy, but it will also help Flins support his team with the extra resistance shred. This resistance shred is also enough to completely replace an additional resistance shredder on the team, which opens up his team options significantly. Now, instead of having to worry about fitting in an Animo, Hydro, and Electro off-fielder, with most of them being applicators that also have elemental mastery and attack buffs, with one also being from Nod Krai, you can instead split some of these roles up to other characters. Another option would also be to use Bennett as your support, since at this point, the attack and elemental mastery buffs he would offer would be enough to match the buffs and debuffs that come with a unit like Sucrose. So while it will increase his effectiveness in general, it will also open him up to more team comps that he would have had trouble functioning in for. Third Constellation merely increases the level of his burst by 3, but since this is where almost all of his damage lies, this ends up being quite a drastic damage increase. Despite that, this is where his signature weapon starts being better than Constellations. Flins' fourth Constellation will increase his attack by 20%. Additionally, his Essential 4 passive is enhanced. Flins' elemental mastery is increased by 10% of his attack. The maximum increase obtainable this way is 220, capping at 2200 attack. This Constellation is merely a stat increase. However, it is such a powerful stat increase that it will boost Flins' damage by an amount similar to his C3. His C5 increases the level of his elemental skill by 3, but since that is where only a minor percent of his damage comes from, this will not lead to that large of a damage increase, easily his worst Constellation. Flins' final Constellation will elevate the damage dealt to opponents by Flins' lunar charged reactions by 30%. Additionally, when Ascendant Gleam is active, all party members' lunar charge damage is elevated by 10%. This buff is not just another damage percent buff, but it is instead a completely separate multiplier. So this Constellation would increase Flins' lunar charge damage by 30 to 40%, and the entire team's lunar charge damage by 0 to 10%. Since a majority of Flins' damage is also considered to be lunar charged, this ends up increasing his damage output by a ridiculously disgusting amount, while also buffing the damage dealt by his team's lunar charge damage. This is a phenomenal capstone Constellation for Flins, and is a reasonable end to his power cap. Overall though, Flins' Constellations are just pretty good. While they do not completely fix his issues, a good few of them do alleviate his problems, while also granting him more supportive utility. This is great for letting him be used for more reasons and with more teams. However, at the end of the day, his Constellations are mostly just damage increases. This is fine for now while he is one-rotating the enemies that he counters, but it's gonna feel significantly worse later on when he is walled off by the bosses Hoyo is going to make to counter him. Kinda sucks, but that's just how Hoyo wants to be. But with his base kit done, let's move on to his best artifact options. Flins' best in slot artifact is the new Knight of the Skies Unveiling. This thing offers the perfect array of stats for him to use: 80 elemental mastery, 15 to 30% crit rate, and a 10 to 20% lunar charge damage bonus. It has it all. This set is perfect for Flins to use, as it grants him every stat he could ever hope to have. No soup's so strong for him that it can only be outperformed by Mauritius Hunter when without another Nod Krai unit, and when using him with Fiorina. While this does create an issue, as Flins usually will not want Fiorina on his teams, it can be a good alternative in case you are missing out on some other Nod Krai characters. Last set to mention is Gilded Dreams, as it will increase Flins' attack and elemental mastery by a large amount when he triggers a reaction. This buff is pretty strong for him and will be his best option if you do not plan to use Fiorina and until you get a strong Nosu set. But the gap between this and Nosu is pretty large, so it is worth it to get a powerful version of this new set as soon as possible. For main stats, Flins' best setup is using attack percent, and crit with no room for variance, similarly to Nefa. For substats, Flins would want to focus first on getting his energy recharge to a comfortable level. This would be at about 125% if using him with a good battery and some Favonius weapons. In less than ideal teams, his energy requirement could go as high as 165%. The sweet spot would be somewhere around 135% though, as most compositions can build around this energy threshold pretty easily. Next up, you you would be looking for crit at a 1 to 2 ratio, but at a minimum, you would want to achieve 65 to 195 ratio when out of combat. Afterward, aim for about 2000 attack, though higher is always better. With artifacts over with, let's move on to weapon options. Blood-Soaked Runes is Flynn's best in slot polearm available. It gives him so many different stats, from a large base attack to crit rate to extra lunar charge damage with some additional energy generation too. This, when combined, grants Flynn's so much additional damage that outpaces all other weapons all of the time. It is just way too good. However, it is not better than his early Constellations and ends up being better only once his C2 is obtained. If you don't have Blood-Soaked, there are some other polearms available that could work as strong substitutes, like the Staff of Scarlet Sands. Scarlet Sands works so well because Flins really wants that massive crit rate buff, and this weapon will convert his monstrous elemental mastery stat directly into more attack. This is a phenomenal boost for him and gets even better with his C1, as it will allow him to gain an extra stack from this polearm's passive. Fractured Halo is up next. While Flins cannot activate the extra lunar charge damage bonus buff, he can gain the extra attack percent this weapon has, and he benefits greatly from the additional base attack and crit damage too. Fractured Halo is simply just a powerful stat stick and is currently the strongest versatile polearm in the game due to its simple and heavily beneficial stat lineup. Finally, we have his best in slot free-to-play weapon, Prospector's Shovel. While there are some other options that could be better if you have an underwhelming build, Prospector's Shovel comes out on top when you build Flins correctly. Because lunar charge buffs cannot be built into using main or substats, Flins will normally lack this stat, especially compared to others. At a base, he should be getting almost 150% additional attack percent from 2 attack percent main stats and Thrilling Tales, and he can receive almost 700 elemental mastery from himself, Inefa, Sucrose, and the 2 new artifact sets. Crit is also easily obtainable since it is in his best artifact set, it is his best circlet, and his priority for substats is also crit, which would in total net him over 250% crit value as a base. Lunar charge reaction buffs are rare and pretty low though, which is why this weapon ends up being so high. However, if you are dealing with the substat curse, then you can get more use out of other weapons like Deathmatch, Battle of the Fjords, and the Inazuman event polearm, which all help patch up any weak points he might have in his artifacts. One final weapon to mention would be Favonius Lance. While it might offer generally weaker and less useful stats than the other polearms might, it does have the benefit that it could potentially enable him to use his normal burst in his rotation. If this is somehow enabled, then it could potentially be one of his best weapon options around, but this has yet to be proven possible, and it will also extend his rotation from 16 seconds to something more normal. There's a bunch of pros and cons to this, but if you do want to use his normal burst, then this weapon is probably going to be the one you're going to have to use. Now, before mentioning team comps, it's time to discuss what synergy Flins has with our current cast of characters. Inefa is honestly the only unit that pairs really well with Flins. While this can be attributed to the fact that they both work best in the same comps, they both buff each other with their Nod Krai artifacts, and they both trigger Ascending Gleam for the other to utilize. This synergy is present because of Inefa's role consolidation. Her ability to act as an electro applicator while also being a defensive support is the main attributor to making Flins work so well, but she also gets the benefit that she will buff Flins and deal a large amount of damage herself, while also supporting his shorter rotations. Both of these units will also increase the damage done by the other, while also making the lunar charge reaction deal consistent and large bouts of damage. These two are perfect for each other to the point that they should always be paired together, though Flins does gain more from Inefa than Inefa gains from Flins. With that done, let's move on to Flins' team compositions. As a DPS that focuses on lunar charge, Flins has only one role and one type of team. In Taser comps, he acts as a hypercarry main DPS that will deal the bulk of the team's damage while also granting every other unit access to the lunar charge reaction. This becomes especially beneficial for units that could build large amounts of crit but don't have the most application like Overrun, Yalan, and Furina. The main issue with him is his restrictions. As he needs another Nod Krai unit to activate his passives, he needs an off-field Hydro Applicator for him to utilize his entire kit, and he needs an off-field Electro Applicator else his team loses out on consistent swirls and lunar charge damage throughout the rotation. On top of that, he also wants characters that have generally shorter cooldowns. That way they can support his shorter rotation times. This is mainly why Inefa is so beneficial to Flins, as she will take up the role of the defensive support while also applying Electro for swirling and lunar charge triggering, and while being another Nod Krai unit that has relatively short cooldowns. Without her, I know is the next best thing, as she would be a Nod Krai support with Hydro Application and shorter cooldowns. The most unfortunate thing is that without these units, Flins will have a hard time dealing enough damage to clear endgame modes. Last comp to mention are Flins Hyperbloom teams, which require the use of a slower Dendro Applicator. These will be Flins' best free-to-play comps since he has access to much better 4-star support units here. I know Yao Yao and and Overrun, I know Yao Yao and Fischl, or I know Kale and Kuki all work well here to dish out a ton of Hyper Bloom and Lunar Charged damage. The only requirement is having a slower Dendro applicator in order for Lunar Charged to still be triggered pretty reliably. So if you are having trouble setting up a good team for Flins to use, default to Hyper Bloom is not a bad backup. But for now, let's end off the video with Flins' rating. For damage output, Flins is easily raking in at 5 out of 5. While he might not do much damage when outside of his niche, when used in the way he was designed to be used, he will normally reach top tier damage. While he may excel in damage output, he hardly does anything else. For application, he doesn't apply much Electro. When he does apply, it's all in small AoEs, and he only applies Electro when used on field. This nets him a rather poor 1 out of 5 for application. For offensive utility, Flins can offer the team the Lunar Charged reaction, which is more consistent and valuable than Electro Charged. On top of that, he could buff the team's Lunar Charged damage by up to 14%. While these are good enough buffs to warrant using him as they are activated passively, they are not enough to warrant giving him a high score. However, the sheer consistency of this new reaction is enough to consider giving him a pretty okay 1.5 out of 5. For battery potential, Flins will generate 1 particle every 2 seconds when he deals damage with his normal attacks while in his elemental skills main DPS state. This allows him to generate 4 particles per rotation. He cannot generate any other particles in any other way. This is slightly below average already, and it gets worse when we consider this needs to occur over his 6 seconds of on-field time. And he needs all of this energy for himself too, it cannot be shared. All of these factors net him a harsh 1 out of 5 for battery potential. For defensive utility, Flins has the normal 50% interruption resistance most main DPS have currently, which nets him a 0.5 out of 5. For flexibility and versatility, Flins can only be used as a main DPS, and he can only function in Taser teams. That's it. And on top of that, he needs another Nod Krai unit to function, and he needs another Electro unit for his reaction to be usable by the team. He is one of the most limited characters in the game, netting him a 0.5 out of 5 for flexibility and versatility. Overall, Flins is a strong main DPS with enough in his kit to make him work reliably in this role. His main issue is team building, as the flaws in his kit forces him to use very specific characters. This is his largest downfall, and is what earns him a 3 out of 5 for overall value. While you can make him work with a more free-to-play team, it will be incredibly difficult as his needs are plentiful. But when you are able to fulfill those needs, you will be greatly rewarded with one of the most powerful damage dealers in the game. Should you pull, that is ultimately up to you. But with how the beta is pushing Flins to be more and more reliant on Anefa, I would say no if you don't have her, and definitely not if you do. Flins simply does not have enough upsides right now, as he is completely reliant on his burst for any form of damage, which can cause issues due to all the energy sapping effects currently in the game. He's completely bound to one singular team archetype that has restrictions upon restrictions, and he is a main DPS, which means he's incredibly prone to power creep. Additionally, if you do have Anefa, you have all the benefits that Flins brings, as she does everything he can, but much more consistently, while acting as a defensive support and while also buffing your already overpowered main DPS. It's sad, but Flins' kit is just not desirable. But that's all I have to say about Flins. Now tell me your thoughts. What do you think of him? Do you intend to use his normal playstyle, or do you hope to use him in a different way? Do you intend to vertically invest, or are you hoping maybe some other character will do him some good? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. But with that, I will skedaddle. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye.